My husband, Arthur, has brought me this same cup of tea every night for 40 years. He calls it his little act of love. He says my mind is failing, that I'm getting forgetful, a burden. But tonight I didn't drink it. I pretended to fall into that deep, drugged sleep he wanted, because I had to learn the truth. And his plan wasn't to care for me. It was to get rid of me. For 40 years, my life with Arthur has been measured in cups of tea, every single night. Just as the evening news ended, he would walk in from the kitchen holding 2 mugs. Mine was always the blue one, a faded ceramic cup I'd won at a county fair when we were barely married. He'd place it on the coaster beside my armchair, the steam fragrant with chamomile and a hint of honey. It was his ritual, a small, constant declaration of his love. He called it our anchor in a changing world. For most of our lives, he was right. That simple cup of tea was a promise that no matter what the day had thrown at us, we would end it together, in quiet comfort. But over the last 6 months, the anchor began to feel like a weight, dragging me down into a dark, silent place. The tea changed. It started with a faint, almost imperceptible bitterness that clung to the back of my tongue, an unpleasant chemical note that even the honey couldn't mask. When I first mentioned it, Arthur just smiled, that patient, placid smile he reserved for when he thought I was being fussy. "It's a new organic brand, dear," he'd said, patting my hand. "It's supposed to be better for you. You just need to get used to it." I tried to believe him. I wanted to believe him. Arthur was my rock, the man who held my hand through childbirth and business failures, who celebrated every small victory and mourned every loss as if it were his own. The taste was one thing, but what came after was the real thief. Within half an hour of finishing my cup, a fog would descend. It wasn't the gentle, welcome drowsiness of a long day coming to a close. This was a suffocating blanket, heavy and absolute. My limbs would feel like lead, my thoughts would unravel, and the world would blur at the edges. I'd stumble to bed, often with Arthur's hand guiding my elbow, his voice a distant murmur of concern. The sleep that followed was not restful. It was a void, a black, dreamless pit where hours vanished without a trace. I would wake up feeling hollowed out, my head thick and my memory riddled with holes, as if pieces of my mind had been neatly excised during the night. The mornings were the worst. I, Rose Miller, who had managed the books for a thriving local hardware business for 30 years, who could reconcile accounts down to the last penny in my head, started making mistakes. I'd forget to pay a bill. I'd leave the stove on. I'd stand in the middle of the grocery store, unable to remember the one thing I came for. Each lapse was a fresh crack in my confidence, and Arthur was always there to patch it up with his suffocating pity. "Don't worry, my love," he'd coo, his arm around my shoulders. "We all get a little forgetful. It's just part of getting older. That's why I make you the tea, to help calm your nerves." He made my own mind feel like a foreign country, and he was the only one with a map. Tonight, however, something inside me snapped. It was a quiet rebellion, born from 100 small slights and a growing, terrifying certainty. As he handed me the blue mug, our fingers brushed, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't concern, it was anticipation. He watched me too closely as I raised the cup to my lips, his smile just a little too tight. That single, unguarded look was enough. It confirmed every fear that had been festering in the dark corners of my heart. The bitterness in the tea was not from a new organic brand. It was the taste of betrayal. I stood up, cradling the warm mug in my hands, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm just going to check on my azalea," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "The leaves have been looking so wilted." He simply nodded, turning his attention back to the television, already confident in the tea's inevitable effect. I walked to the living room window where the poor plant sat, its pink flowers drooping sadly. It looked just how I felt. With my back to him, my hands shaking so badly that the tea sloshed against the rim, I took a deep breath. I listened for the familiar drone of the news anchor's voice, a sound that had always meant safety, but now served as the cover for my desperate act. Then, I tipped the cup. The hot amber liquid poured silently into the soil, disappearing into the dirt around the plant's roots. I held the empty mug for a moment, the ceramic still warm against my fingers. I was no longer a willing patient taking her medicine. Tonight, I was going to stay awake. I would pretend to fall into that deep chemical sleep, and I would finally see what my loving husband did when he thought I was gone from the world. The thought was terrifying, but it was also electrifying. For the first time in months, the fog was beginning to lift, and I knew the monster I had to face wasn't old age. He was sitting right there in my living room, waiting for me to pass out, and I was ready to see his true face. I returned to the living room, placing the empty blue mug back on its coaster with a soft click. The sound seemed to echo in the tense silence. I forced a yawn, a wide, theatrical gesture that felt both foolish and necessary. That tea really hit the spot, Artie," I murmured, letting my voice sound thick and hazy. "I think I'm going to turn in." He glanced up from the television, his eyes scanning my face with an unnerving intensity. For a heart-stopping moment, I was sure he could see the truth, that he could hear the frantic drumming of my pulse. But then his expression softened into that familiar condescending smile. "Of course, dear. You get your rest. I'll be in shortly." The short walk to our bedroom felt like crossing a minefield. I made myself sway slightly, bumping into the edge of the hallway table as if my coordination was failing me. I heard his soft chuckle from the living room, a sound that no longer felt like shared amusement, but like the satisfaction of a scientist observing a successful experiment. I didn't look back. I pulled the covers up to my chin, the cool cotton sheets a stark contrast to the fire of adrenaline in my veins. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing, forcing it into the slow, deep rhythm of a drugged sleep, a rhythm I now knew by heart. It was the most important performance of my life, and my freedom depended on the audience of one believing every second of it. Lying there in the dark, feigning unconsciousness, my mind replayed the countless little moments that had led to this. The gaslighting had been a masterclass in cruelty, a slow, methodical erosion of my reality. A few months ago, I'd spent an entire morning frantically searching for my car keys, only for Arthur to find them in the sugar bowl. "Oh, Rosie," he'd said, shaking his head with a sad little smile. "Your mind is playing tricks on you again. We need to be more careful, don't we?" He never raised his voice. He was never overtly cruel. His weapon was pity, a soft, suffocating kindness that made me feel like a child, incompetent and utterly dependent on him. Then there was the missed appointment with our family doctor, a checkup I had been waiting weeks for. Arthur had insisted the appointment was on a Wednesday. I was certain it was Tuesday. We argued, gently of course, until I finally conceded, worn down by his unwavering certainty. When the doctor's office called on Wednesday to ask why I'd missed my appointment the day before, Arthur just held me as I cried in frustration. "It's all right, my love," he whispered, stroking my hair. "These things happen. I'll make another appointment for you. I'll handle everything from now on." He was so convincing that I'd even found myself thanking him. He was isolating me, one forgotten detail at a time, making himself the sole gatekeeper of my life. I felt so utterly alone in my own home, a ghost in the life I had built. It's a chilling feeling, to have the person closest to you become the source of your deepest fear. It makes me wonder just how many others have felt this invisible cage closing in around them. As my story travels out from my quiet little house into the world, I am truly curious to know where it lands. If you're listening, please let me know in the comments what city or country my voice has reached. Knowing I'm not just speaking into the void gives me a strange sort of comfort. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, jolting me from my thoughts. I held my breath, my body perfectly still. The bedroom door opened a few more inches, spilling a thin sliver of light across the floor. I could see his silhouette standing there, watching me. He didn't move for what felt like an eternity. He was making sure. I focused on my breathing, in and out, slow and even, praying he couldn't see the wild fluttering of my eyelids. Finally, satisfied, he took a step back, pulling the door almost completely shut, leaving only a tiny crack. I expected to hear his footsteps move towards the living room recliner, or perhaps the bathroom. I waited for the familiar sounds of his nightly routine, the television being turned off, the gentle click of the lamp, the soft sigh as he settled into bed beside me. But those sounds never came. Instead, I heard his footsteps move in the opposite direction, down the hall, away from our bedroom. They stopped. Then I heard a sound that sent a jolt of pure ice through my veins. It was a faint metallic sound, a key turning in a lock. It was the key to his study, a room he always kept locked, a room he called his private sanctuary for managing our finances and investments. He never went in there at night. Never. Not unless he had something to do that he didn't want me to see. The lock clicked open, the door creaked, and then it shut with a soft, final thud, sealing him inside. And in that moment, I knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever he was hiding in that room was the very reason he needed me unconscious every single night. Lying in that bed, I was a coiled spring of tension. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to get up, to storm down that hallway and demand he open the door. But I held myself in check. An open confrontation would be my word against his, the ravings of a confused old woman against a devoted, caring husband. No, I needed proof. I needed to see what was so important that it required my chemically induced absence. I counted to 100, then 200. My mind a whirlwind of terrible possibilities. Was he in debt? Gambling? Was there another woman? The questions were a swarm of angry hornets in my head. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I slid out of bed. My bare feet were cold against the hardwood floor, and I moved with a stealth I didn't know I possessed. Each step was deliberate, silent, my breath held tight in my chest. The house was so quiet that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The sliver of light from under the study door was a beacon, drawing me forward. I crept down the hallway, my body pressed against the wall, until I was right beside the doorframe. I leaned in, my ear just inches from the wood, and I listened. At first, all I could hear was the rustle of paper, a lot of paper. Then came the unmistakable rhythmic tapping of a keyboard. He was on his computer. I angled my head, trying to peer through the tiny crack between the door and the frame. The view was frustratingly limited. I could see a corner of his large oak desk, a stack of manila folders, and his hand as it moved from the keyboard to the mouse. He was working with a swift, focused intensity that I hadn't seen in him for years. This wasn't a man winding down for the night. This was a man on a mission. He muttered to himself, his voice a low, frustrated rumble. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was one of impatience. I saw him pick up the phone, his back partially to me. He dialed a number, his fingers tapping out the sequence with practiced ease. "Yes, it's Arthur Miller," he said, his voice low but clear. There was a pause. "I'm calling about the application. I wanted to confirm you received the raw supplementary documents I sent over this afternoon, the power of attorney, and the physician's cognitive assessment." My heart stopped. Power of attorney? Physician's assessment? My doctor hadn't assessed me for anything. My last visit was for a routine blood pressure check. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. He was talking to someone official, someone who required documents. The line about a cognitive assessment made my stomach clench with a cold, hard dread. He was fabricating a, story about my health, painting a picture of a woman whose mind was so far gone she couldn't be trusted with her own affairs. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a desperate mistake. This was a plan, intricate and methodical. He continued his conversation. "Excellent. And the timeline? How quickly can we proceed once the final paperwork is approved?" He listened for a moment, nodding. "Within the month? That's perfect. Yes, her decline has been rapid. It's been very difficult. I just want to ensure she gets the best care possible." The lie was so smooth, so full of feigned sorrow, that had I not been standing there, I might have believed it myself. He was a performer, and I had been his unwitting audience for months. He hung up the phone with a sigh of satisfaction. Then I saw it. He leaned back in his chair, stretching, and for a brief moment, the computer screen came into view. I could only see a fragment of the web page he was on, but it was enough. The logo was elegant, a stylized oak tree with sweeping branches. The truth hit me like a physical blow. I had to press my hand against my mouth to stifle a gasp. He wasn't trying to help me. He wasn't trying to manage my decline. He was trying to get rid of me. He was drugging me to create the symptoms, faking medical documents, and preparing to have me committed so he could take full control of our assets. The house, the savings, the business I had worked my entire life to build. He wanted it all, and I was just an obstacle to be removed and locked away. The chill I felt was no longer just fear. It was rage. A cold, clear rage that burned away all the confusion and self-doubt of the past few months. I knew exactly who my husband was now, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I stumbled back from the door, my hand clamped over my mouth. The image of that Oakwood Senior Living logo burned into my mind. I retreated to the bedroom in a silent, panicked rush, my thoughts a chaotic storm. For a moment, all I could do was sit on the edge of the bed, my body trembling with a toxic cocktail of fury and heartbreak. The man I had shared my life with, the father of my children, was meticulously plotting my burial while I was still alive. He was erasing me. The grief was a physical weight, so heavy it felt hard to breathe. But grief quickly gave way to something else, something harder and sharper. It was the same steel that had seen me through raising 2 kids while building a business from the ground up. It was resolve. I would not be erased. I would not be a footnote in the story of his greed. He thought he was dealing with a frail, confused old woman. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. I lay back down, pulling the covers up, and waited. When he finally came to bed an hour later, his movements were quiet and satisfied. He thought his plan was proceeding perfectly. He had no idea the game had changed. The next morning was excruciating. I had to feign the same groggy confusion he expected, moving slowly, speaking in fragmented sentences. "Did you sleep well, dear?" he asked, pouring me a cup of coffee. The gesture, once a comfort, now felt like a mockery. "I think so," I mumbled, deliberately avoiding his eyes. "It's all a bit of a blur." His smile was patronizing. "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything today." I just nodded, sipping the coffee he handed me, my mind already 10 steps ahead. As soon as he left, for his errands, likely to meet with lawyers or bankers, my own plan would begin. The moment the front door clicked shut, I was a blur of motion. I went straight to his study. The door was locked as expected. But Arthur, for all his cunning, was a man of habit. For 20 years, he'd kept a spare key hidden on the top ledge of the doorframe. My fingers, shaking but determined, found the small brass key right where I knew it would be. Inside, the room was neat, orderly, and damning. On his desk lay the file. It was a thick manila folder labeled simply, "Rose's Care." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a nightmare in black and white. There were professionally printed brochures for Oakwood, complete with floor plans and pricing lists that made my head spin. There were forged documents, a power of attorney form, already signed with a clumsy imitation of my signature, and that physician's assessment. It detailed my symptoms: severe memory loss, disorientation, emotional instability. It was a fictionalized portrait of my own decline, authored by my husband. He had even backdated entries in a journal, noting my episodes to build a false history. It was a masterpiece of cold, calculated deception. My first instinct was to burn it all, to destroy the lies he had so carefully constructed. But I stopped myself. This was evidence. This was my weapon. I took out my phone, and with steady hands, I photographed every single page. The brochures, the forged signatures, the fraudulent medical report, the backdated journal entries. Every click of the camera shutter felt like a small victory, a piece of my power being reclaimed. I was no longer just the victim in his story. I was becoming the author of his downfall. As I documented his betrayal, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. The world he had tried to shrink into a fog of confusion and fear was suddenly sharp and clear again. He had underestimated me, and that was going to be his ruin. It's strange how a moment of absolute crisis can give you such focus. It makes you realize what you're truly made of. If this story of finding strength in the darkest of moments resonates with you, if you believe in the power of fighting back, I invite you to join this community. Your subscription is a voice against the silence, so please hit that subscribe button and become a part of it. After photographing everything, I put the file back exactly where I found it, wiped my fingerprints from the spare key, and placed it back on the door frame. I locked the study and went back to the kitchen. I sat at the table, my heart still pounding, but now it was with a warrior's rhythm, not a victim's. I had the proof. The next step was to find an ally. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the contact list. There was only one person I could trust to believe me without question. One person who had the strength and the smarts to help me navigate the war that was coming. My granddaughter, Sarah. I pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before Sarah answered, her voice bright and cheerful. "Grandma, how are you doing this morning?" The simple sound of her voice, so full of life and love, was almost enough to make me break down. I had to take a deep, shuddering breath before I could speak, forcing the tears back. I couldn't afford to sound hysterical. I needed to be calm, credible. "Sarah, darling," I began, my voice lower than usual, tight with urgency. "I need your help. Something is wrong. Something is very wrong with Grandpa." The line went quiet for a beat. Sarah, a sharp-witted paralegal who inherited her grandmother's intolerance for nonsense, immediately sensed the gravity in my tone. The cheerfulness vanished, replaced by a focused concern. "What is it, Grandma? Are you okay? Where is he?" I could hear the faint clatter of a keyboard in the background as she stopped whatever she was doing. "He's out," I said quickly. "I don't have much time. It's the tea he gives me. And it's so much more than that." I stumbled through the story, the words pouring out of me in a torrent. The bitter taste, the nightly fogs, the feigned sleep, the locked study, and the horrifying discovery of the Oakwood file. I sent her the photos I had taken, one by one. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, oppressive. I could almost feel her shock and fury radiating through the phone. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whip crack. "That son of a bitch," she hissed, the words raw with anger. "I knew it. I knew something was off last month. He was watching you like a hawk, talking about you like you were already gone." Her validation was a balm on my raw nerves. I wasn't crazy. Someone else saw it too. "Stay right where you are, Grandma," she commanded, her voice shifting into the efficient, no-nonsense tone she used at work. "Don't touch anything else. Don't let him know you know. I'm on my way. I'm leaving work right now, and I'm bringing someone with me. A friend of mine, Jessica Davis. She's not just a lawyer. She's one of the best family law attorneys in the state, and she specializes in elder abuse cases. We're going to burn him to the ground." The fierce loyalty in her voice was the first real ray of hope I'd felt in months. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. An hour later, a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. Sarah practically leaped out, her face a mask of grim determination. Beside her was a tall, impeccably dressed woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. This was Jessica Davis. I let them in, my hands trembling as I locked the door behind them. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Arthur had patronizingly patted my hand just hours before. Now, it was a war room. I showed Jessica the original file from the study. She put on a pair of thin gloves and examined each page with meticulous care, her expression growing colder with every document she reviewed. She looked at the forged signature on the power of attorney, holding it up to the light. "This is a clumsy forgery," she said, her voice calm but lethal. "And this cognitive assessment? It's not even on official letterhead. It's a template he downloaded. He's an amateur, Mrs. Miller. A cruel one, but an amateur. and amateurs make mistakes. She then turned her attention to me, her gaze softening slightly. "Rose," she said, dropping the formal Mrs. Miller. "The first thing we need to do is protect you. And your assets. We'll go to the bank this afternoon. We will freeze every joint account and put a fraud alert on your credit. He will be cut off completely by the end of the day. Second, I will file an emergency petition with the court to invalidate this fraudulent power of attorney. He will not have the authority to make a single decision for you." Each sentence was a building block, constructing a fortress around me. "But what about the tea?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "How do we prove he was drugging me?" Sarah, who had been listening intently, suddenly snapped her fingers. "The azalea," she said, her eyes wide. "Grandma, you said you poured the tea into the potted azalea last night." Jessica's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant," she said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "We can take a soil sample and have it tested. If we can identify a sedative in that soil, we have him. That moves this from a financial dispute to a criminal case. Assault. Poisoning." The word hung in the air, ugly and terrifying, but also powerful. It gave a name to the evil he had been committing. In that moment, sitting with these two brilliant, fierce women, I felt the tide of the war begin to turn. He had lit a fire to destroy me, but we were about to use it to forge my victory. The rest of that afternoon was a blur of calculated action, a stark contrast to the stagnant fog I had been living in. With Jessica Davis as our general and Sarah as my trusted lieutenant, we moved with a purpose that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The first stop was the bank. Walking into the familiar building where I had been a customer for 40 years felt different. This time, I wasn't just making a deposit. I was drawing a line in the sand. The bank manager, a kind man named Mr. Henderson who had known me and Arthur for years, looked stunned as Jessica calmly and methodically explained the situation, presenting him with the initial paperwork she had already prepared. "We need to freeze all joint accounts immediately and transfer Rose's personal funds into a new individual account that only she can access," Jessica stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Mr. Henderson's eyes widened with a mixture of shock and sympathy as he looked at me. "Rose, I had no idea," he stammered. I saw in his face the reflection of the story Arthur had been telling the world, the story of the frail, confused wife. I met his gaze, my back straight, my voice clear. "There are a lot of things people don't know, Bill," I said. "But they're about to find out." By the time we left, Arthur's access to our life savings was completely severed. The feeling was intoxicating. It was the first lock I'd ever put on a door he couldn't open. Next, we went to a small, independent lab that Jessica knew. Sarah had carefully collected a soil sample from the pot of my poor, drooping azalea, sealing it in a plastic bag as if it were a precious artifact, which, in a way, it was. It held the secret to his crimes. Handing it over to the lab technician felt momentous. Jessica was clear with her instructions. "We need a full toxicology screening. I want you to look for any common sedatives, benzodiazepines, anything that doesn't belong in potting soil." The technician nodded, his face impassive. "We'll have preliminary results for you in 48 hours, he said. 2 days. In 2 days, I would have the final, undeniable proof. Our final stop before heading to Sarah's was my own. Home. We had to move quickly before Arthur returned. Sarah and I swept through the house like a whirlwind, gathering my essentials: clothes, medication, and personal documents. But I was after something more important. I went straight to the old shoebox hidden on the top shelf of my closet. Inside were the original deeds to the house and the business, documents that were in my name alone, from before I had even married Arthur. I had started the hardware business with a small inheritance from my father, and the house was my own. Arthur had married into my life, not the other way around, a fact he seemed to have conveniently forgotten. As I tucked the precious documents into my bag, my eyes fell on our wedding album, sitting on the dresser. I opened it, my fingers tracing the smiling face of the young man I had promised my life to. The love in that photo felt so real, so tangible. How could that man have curdled into the monster he was today? The question was a sharp, stabbing pain in my chest. For a moment, the warrior faltered, and the grieving wife took over. Sarah came up behind me and gently closed the album. "Don't look at him, Grandma," she said softly. "Look at her." She pointed to my younger self in the photo, smiling and full of hope. "She's the one we're fighting for. She built all of this. He won't take it from her." Her words strengthened my resolve. She was right. I wasn't just fighting the man Arthur had become. I was protecting the legacy of the woman I had always been. With my bag packed and the evidence secured, we left the house. As I closed the door behind me, I took one last look at the home I had filled with love and laughter. It looked the same, but it felt different. It was no longer a cage disguised as a sanctuary. It was now the battlefield where I would reclaim my life. We got into Sarah's car, and as we drove away, I didn't look back. I was focused only on what lay ahead: the fight, the truth, and the moment I would finally see justice done. The fortress was built. Now, it was time to prepare for the siege. The 48 hours I spent waiting for the lab results were the longest of my life. I stayed at Sarah's apartment, a bright, modern space that felt like a different universe from the quiet, tense atmosphere of my own home. Here, there were no shadows hiding in the corners, no bitter aftertaste in my tea. I drank coffee, black and strong, and with every cup, I felt the fog in my mind dissipate a little more. Makfi. Thoughts became sharper, my memories clearer. I started making lists, outlining timelines, recalling specific dates and conversations with an accuracy that would have been impossible just a week earlier. I was re-inhabiting my own mind, and it felt like coming home. During that time, my phone buzzed incessantly with calls and texts from Arthur. The first was a simple, "Where are you, dear?" By evening, they had escalated into a frantic, almost panicked tone. "Rose, I'm worried sick. Your phone is on, but you're not answering. Please, just let me know you're safe." Reading his feigned concern made my stomach turn. He wasn't worried about my safety. He was worried about his plan. My unscheduled absence was a variable he hadn't accounted for, a wrench thrown into the gears of his meticulous machine. I followed Jessica's strict instructions and ignored every call, every message. My silence was a weapon, and it was clearly making him unravel. On the second day, Jessica called. Her voice was calm, but I could hear a triumphant edge to it. "We have it, Rose," she said. "The lab results are in. The soil from your azalea pot tested positive for high concentrations of lorazepam. Lorazepam, a powerful sedative, a benzodiazepine used to treat anxiety. It was a prescription drug, a drug I had certainly never been prescribed." "It's the smoking gun," Jessica continued, her voice hardening. "To get this, he would have needed a prescription. Either he forged one, or he got it from a doctor under false pretenses. Either way, it's a criminal offense. We have him." A wave of vindication washed over me, so potent it left me breathless. It was real. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being poisoned. The knowledge was horrifying, but it was also liberating. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. Now, we could move from defense to offense. Jessica's plan was simple and brilliant. "He's getting desperate, Rose," she explained. "He'll be making mistakes. We're going to let him walk right into a trap. I want you to go home." The idea of returning to that house, of facing him, sent a spike of fear through me. But Jessica was quick to reassure me. "You won't be alone. Sarah will be with you. And the police will be on standby. Just a phone call away. We need to catch him in the act. We need to record him." She explained the next steps. Sarah would equip me with a small, discreet recording device. I was to confront Arthur, to tell him I knew about Oakwood, about the power of attorney, about everything. We needed his confession, or at the very least, his incriminating denials, on tape. That evening, Sarah and I drove back to my house. She showed me how to use the recorder, a tiny device disguised as a decorative pin on my cardigan. "Just press this button once to start, Grandma," she instructed, her hands steady on mine. "Be brave. You've got this." As we pulled into the driveway, I saw Arthur's car. The house was lit up, every light blazing, as if he were trying to ward off the darkness that he himself had invited in. My heart hammered in my chest, but as I looked at my reflection in the car window, I saw not a frightened old woman, but a determined survivor. Sarah gave my hand a final squeeze. "I'll be right down the street. The second you need me, I'm coming, and the police are ready." I took a deep breath, pinned the recorder to my cardigan, and pressed the small button. Then I got out of the car, walked up the familiar stone path, and inserted my key into the lock of my front door. It was time to face the monster in my home. The trap was set. All that was left was for the prey to walk into it. The moment I stepped inside, he was there, rushing towards me from the living room. His face was a mask of contrived relief, but I could see the panic flickering in his eyes. "Rose, thank God. Where have you been? I've been out of my mind with worry." He reached for me, trying to pull me into an embrace, but I took a step back, holding up a hand to stop him. The gesture, so small and simple, made him freeze. It was the first time in our 40 years of marriage that I had ever refused his touch. "Don't, Arthur," I said, my voice cold and steady, utterly devoid of the warmth he was used to. "Don't touch me." I walked past him into the living room, my steps deliberate. The room felt alien, a stage set for a final, terrible act. I turned to face him, my gaze unwavering. The recorder, disguised as a silver leaf pin, on my cardigan, felt like a heavy shield over my heart. He followed me, his expression shifting from feigned concern to genuine confusion and alarm. "Rose, what's wrong? You're frightening me. You haven't been yourself." "Oh, I haven't been myself for months, Arthur," I replied, a bitter irony lacing my words. "But I am now. I am more myself than I have been in a very long time." The fog has finally lifted. I saw a flash of pure, undiluted fear in his eyes before he masked it again. "What are you talking about, dear? What fog? Did you take your medication?" he asked, falling back on his well-rehearsed script. "I'm not talking about my medication," I said, my voice rising with a controlled anger. "I'm talking about yours, the special ingredient in my nightly tea, the lorazepam." The name of the drug hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. He flinched as if I had struck him. His face went white, the blood draining from it so fast he looked like a ghost. "Lorazepam? I don't know what you're talking about. You're confused, Rose. You're not well." "I am not confused," I shot back, taking a step towards him. He instinctively took a step back. The balance of power in the room had irrevocably shifted. "I know everything, Arthur. I know about the Oakwood senior living brochures in your study. I know about the fraudulent power of attorney you forged. I know about the fake physician's assessment you created to have me declared incompetent." With each accusation, he seemed to shrink, the facade of the doting husband crumbling away to reveal the weak, grasping man beneath. He started to stammer, his hands fluttering nervously. That's not what it looks like. I was just exploring options for the future. I was worried about you, about what would happen if your memory got worse. I was trying to protect you." The lie was so pathetic, so transparent, that it fueled my anger. "Protect me?" I almost laughed. "By drugging me into a stupor so you could create the very symptoms you needed to lock me away? By stealing my signature to get control of everything I have ever worked for? You call that protection?" He finally broke. His shoulders slumped in defeat, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape he knew he wouldn't find. It got out of hand," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just overwhelmed. The finances, the pressure. It was a pathetic excuse, a desperate attempt to paint himself as a victim. I wasn't buying it." "So you decided to drug your wife of 40 years and have her committed?" I pressed, my voice like ice. "Just so you could have the house and the money all to yourself? Was that the plan, Arthur? Tell me, was that the plan? He looked at me then, and in his eyes, I saw the truth. There was no remorse. There was only the bitter resentment of a man who had been caught. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was a confession, a damning admission of guilt that was now forever captured by the tiny silver leaf pinned to my chest. I had him. I had everything I needed. I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around my phone. It was time to end this. With Arthur's silent confession hanging in the air, I pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I dialed Sarah's number, the one she had told me to call when it was over. As I pressed the button, I kept my eyes locked on my husband. The color was slowly returning to his face, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding of his position. The trapped animal was about to start thrashing. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. "Who are you calling?" "Rose, we can talk about this. We can fix this." The offer was laughable. There was nothing left to fix. The foundation of our life together had been a lie, and he had dynamited what was left of it. "It's a little late for that, Arthur," I said calmly, just as Sarah's voice came on the line. "It's done," I said to her, each word a final nail in his coffin. "I have it. It's time." I didn't have to say anything else. Within minutes, the quiet suburban street outside was filled with the flashing red and blue lights of 2 police cars. They pulled into the driveway, their arrival swift and silent. 2 uniformed officers, a man and a woman, came to the door. Sarah was right behind them, her face set like stone. Arthur stared at the uniforms, his mouth agape, his entire body trembling. The reality of the situation was crashing down on him in a wave of flashing lights and official-looking badges. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was a crime scene, and he was the prime suspect. The female officer, a woman with a kind but no-nonsense face, addressed me first. "Ma'am, are you Rose Miller? Your granddaughter said you might be in danger." I nodded, feeling a profound sense of relief wash over me. "I'm Rose," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I'm not in danger anymore, but I am the victim of a crime." I unpinned the silver leaf from my cardigan and handed it to her. "This is a recording of our conversation." He confessed. As one officer took the recorder, the other turned to Arthur. "Sir, I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back." Arthur looked utterly broken, a hollowed-out shell of the confident, manipulative man who had been controlling my life for months. He didn't resist. He seemed to have no fight left in him. As the officer cuffed his hands behind his back, his eyes met mine. There was no anger, no apology. There was only the blank, desolate look of a man whose world had just ended. He had gambled everything on my weakness, and he had lost spectacularly to my strength. They led him out of the house, his shoulders slumped, his feet shuffling. He didn't look like the monster who had terrorized me. He just looked small, pathetic. As he passed by me, he whispered my name, his voice hoarse. "Rose." It wasn't an apology. It was the sound of a final, desperate plea from a drowning man. I didn't respond. I just watched as they put him in the back of the police car, the blue and red lights washing over his pale, defeated face before the door slammed shut, sealing his fate. The world is full of stories. Some of them are quiet tragedies happening behind closed doors. Mine almost was. Sharing it, giving it a voice, feels like turning a light on in a dark room, showing that these things can and do happen, but they can also be overcome. Perhaps you, or someone you know, has a story of finding strength when it was needed most. I'd be honored if you'd share in the comments where you are listening from, so I know just how far this story of survival has traveled. Sarah came to my side, wrapping her arms around me in a fierce, protective hug. I leaned into her, finally allowing the tension that had held me together for days to release. The tears I had refused to shed finally came, not tears of sadness or grief, but tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The monster was gone. The nightmare was over. I was safe. I was free. I stood there in the doorway of my own home, watching the taillights of the police car disappear down the street, carrying away the wreckage of my past. The reckoning was complete. It was time to begin the rest of my life. In the days that followed Arthur's arrest, a profound and unfamiliar quiet settled over the house. At first, it was unsettling. The silence was a void, amplifying the absence of the man who had been a constant presence in my life for 4 decades. I would catch myself listening for the sound of his footsteps on the stairs or the turning of his key in the door, old habits dying hard. The house felt too big, too empty. It was a museum of a life that was no longer mine. Every photograph and piece of furniture, a memory of a love I now knew to be a lie. Sarah, bless her heart, stayed with me for that first week. She understood that the victory in the war didn't mean the wounds had instantly healed. Together, we began the slow, deliberate process of cleansing my home of his presence. We boxed up his clothes, his books, his collection of old records. Each item was a ghost of a shared memory, and packing them away was like performing a difficult but necessary exorcism. We worked mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable, companionable silence, punctuated by Sarah's occasional attempts to make me laugh. The hardest part was the wedding album. I found it sitting on the dresser, a silent accusation. Sarah picked it up. "What do you want to do with this, Grandma?" she asked gently. I looked at the smiling faces of my younger self and the man I thought I knew. "I don't know," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I couldn't bear to look at it, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away either. It was a testament to a life I had truly lived, a love I had truly felt, even if the man I'd given it to had proven unworthy. Sarah seemed to understand. She didn't press me. She simply wrapped the album in a soft cloth and placed it in a box in the attic. "It will be here if you ever want it," she said, "but you don't have to look at it until you're ready." Slowly, day by day, the house began to feel like my own again. I moved the furniture around, breaking the old, familiar patterns. I bought new sheets for the bed, bright, cheerful patterns to replace the drab ones he had preferred. I filled the silent spaces with music, not the somber classical music he had always insisted on, but the lively jazz and swing I had loved as a girl. And I started cooking again. Not the bland, simple meals he favored, but complex, flavorful dishes that filled the kitchen with the aroma of spices and herbs. The biggest change was in the living room. The poor, wilted azalea, which had been the unwitting witness to my liberation, was still struggling. I repotted it in fresh soil, trimming away the dead leaves. I placed it in the sunniest spot, by the window, a place where Arthur's favorite armchair used to sit. I had moved the chair to the basement. The plant became my project, a symbol of my own recovery. I talked to it, watered it, and tended to it with a gentle care that I was also, slowly, learning to give myself. As new green shoots began to appear, I felt a parallel sense of hope blooming within my own heart. Jessica handled the legal storm with ruthless efficiency. The evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the forged documents, the lab results from the soil, and Arthur's own bank records, which showed a large down payment made to Oakwood Senior Living. He had no defense. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the prospect of a long, humiliating trial, he pleaded guilty to charges of assault and financial fraud. The legal battle was over before it had truly begun. He was facing a significant prison sentence. There would be no more chances for him to hurt anyone. The quiet in my house was no longer a void. It was peace. It was the sound of safety, of freedom. It was the sound of a storm that had finally passed. With the legal battle resolved and the silence in my house transformed from an echo of loss to a melody of peace, I began to venture back out into the world. It was a tentative process, like a diver slowly resurfacing. For months, Arthur had been my gatekeeper, my interpreter of a world he insisted was too complex for my failing mind. Now I had to rediscover it on my own terms. My first solo trip was to the local nursery, a place I hadn't visited in years. I spent an entire afternoon wandering through rows of vibrant flowers and lush greenery, the sense of damp earth and fresh blossoms a balm to my soul. I came home with a car full of new life, brilliant red geraniums, cheerful yellow marigolds, and fragrant lavender. I spent the weekend planting them in the garden, my hands buried deep in the rich soil. It felt grounding, elemental. As I worked under the warm sun, I felt the last vestiges of Arthur's shadow receding. He had tried to confine me to a world of gray, muted tones, but my life was meant to be lived in color. The garden became my canvas, a riot of defiant, joyful life that mirrored the resurgence of my own spirit. Next, I reconnected with old friends, women I had shared decades of laughter and tears with, but from whom I had become distant under Arthur's subtle campaign of isolation. I called my friend Beatrice and invited her for coffee. I was nervous, unsure of what to say, how to explain the chasm that had opened up in my life. But the moment she saw me, she wrapped me in a hug. "Oh, Rose," she said, her voice full of warmth. "It is so good to see you. Truly see you." We talked for hours, and I told her everything. She listened without judgment, her hand covering mine on the table, her presence a steady, comforting anchor. I realized then how much I had missed the simple, profound power of female friendship. I started a book club with Beatrice and 2 other friends. We met once a week at my house, filling the living room with lively debate and easy laughter. We reclaimed that space, transforming it from a place of quiet dread into a hub of community and intellectual curiosity. My mind, which Arthur had tried so hard to convince me was broken, felt sharper and more engaged than ever. I was not just a survivor. I was thriving. I was rediscovering the woman I had been before Arthur's darkness had begun to encroach. A woman who was smart, capable, and full of life. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah stopped by unannounced. She found me in the kitchen, flour on my apron, humming along to the radio as I kneaded dough for a loaf of bread. She just stood in the doorway for a moment, a wide, beautiful smile on her face. "Look at you, Grandma," she said, her voice soft with affection. "You're back." And in that moment, I knew she was right. I hadn't just reclaimed my house or my finances. I had reclaimed myself. She handed me a small gift-wrapped box. Inside was a silver pin, intricately shaped like a blooming azalea, a single tiny pink stone at its center. "I thought you should have a new one," she said quietly. "A reminder not of the lie, but of the truth, of how strong you are." I pinned it to my cardigan, my fingers tracing its delicate shape. It wasn't a shield this time. It was a medal, a badge of honor I had earned. It was a symbol that even after the harshest winter, after being poisoned at the roots, it was still possible to grow, to heal, and to bloom again, more brilliantly than ever before. My life today is quiet, but it is a rich, textured quiet, woven with the threads of friendship, purpose, and a profound sense of peace. I wake up with the sun, not with the lingering residue of a chemical fog. My first act of the day is to walk into my living room and look at my azalea. It's thriving now, a cascade of vibrant pink blossoms. It stands in the sunlit spot where his armchair used to be, a living monument to survival. It reminds me every day that a poisoned root does not have to mean the end of the story. I received a letter from Arthur a few weeks ago, sent from the state prison. It was a rambling, self-pitying mess, full of excuses and blame, with a single pathetic line at the end that read, "I hope one day you can forgive me." I read it once, then I walked to the fireplace and dropped it into the flames. I watched it curl into black ash and disappear. Forgiveness was a complex, tangled thing, and perhaps one day I would find my way to it. But his freedom from guilt was not my responsibility. My responsibility was to myself, to my own peace. And my peace did not require absolving him. My days are full. I volunteer at the local library twice a week, surrounded by books and stories, my mind sharp and engaged. I host my book club, I tend to my garden, and I have dinner with Sarah at least once a week. We talk about her work, her dreams, my past, and our future. Our bond, forged in the fire of crisis, is the great joy of my life. I am not just a grandmother she visits out of duty. I am her friend, her confidant, a part of her life. He tried to take everything from me, but in the end, he gave me the one thing I didn't know I was missing: a deeper, more meaningful connection with the person who mattered most. Sometimes I think about the woman I was just a year ago, lost in a haze of confusion and self-doubt, believing her own mind was betraying her. I feel a deep, aching compassion for her. I want to reach back in time and tell her, "Hold on. You are stronger than you know. You are not a burden. You are a fortress, and the walls are about to hold." But I can't do that. What I can do is share my story. I can give a voice to the silent battles that so many fight behind closed doors, hidden from the world. These stories, our stories, are not just whispers in the dark. They are a force. They are the light that exposes the shadows, and the strength that reminds others they are not alone. This community, here, is a part of that force. Every subscription, every like, every comment is another voice joining the chorus, making it louder, stronger, and impossible to ignore. Your presence here helps to build a place where survivors are not just believed, they are celebrated. Please help this community grow. Your support is our voice, ensuring these stories are heard far and wide. I am Rose Miller. I am a mother, a grandmother, a businesswoman, a gardener, and a survivor. My story does not end with betrayal. It begins with it. It is a story of reclaiming one's life, one cup of coffee, one blooming flower, one shared laugh at a time. The past is a chapter that is written, but the future, my future, is a beautiful, unwritten page. And for the first time in a very long time, I am the only one holding the pen.